Hi Dan, it's your friend Luke. Good to see you again, buddy. You made another video about me. Awesome. I've watched the video. It's terrible, yeah.
Alright, let's see it.
Mistake number 1, repeatedly in the video he claims that I did not read this paper. Not sure why. He didn't say maybe he didn't read the paper. He just said, yeah, he didn't read the paper.
Well, it was because of the flagrant misrepresentation of this scientific paper. See, you tried to suggest that this fossil of swimming fish was a problem for science. Here were your exact words.
More evidence for Noah's flood that science has no answers for. 0. If you set a school of fish frozen in time while swimming, you win!
Winning.
And this is a problem for science. Why? Because they believe this is how fossils formed. Fish dies, falls to the ground, whatever, somehow they get buried, and bingo bongo, fossil.
So you're literally saying here that science cannot explain how a group of swimming fish could be rapidly buried so that their fossils could preserve their actual swimming behavior. But then you went and showed footage of you actually reading that very part of the paper. Here's what you showed.
Rapid fixation of the fish shoal might be possible by sand dune collapse. Yeah, Dan, I read the paper.
So you demonstrated that you did read the paper, and I apologize. I made an assumption based on the way you misrepresented the science that you did not read the paper. The reality is far worse. You did read the paper, and then you just either didn't understand it or flagrantly lied about it, because you suggested that Dr. Mizumoto did not have an explanation for how the fish could have been rapidly buried. You represented the science as just thinking fish die, they sink to the bottom, somehow they get buried, bingo bongo, they're fossils. So you, again, either wildly misunderstood the theory of how the fish got rapidly buried, or you understood the theory and you just lied in your video and pretended that they did not have a theory of how the fish were rapidly buried. They did have a theory. That's why I assumed, incorrectly, I acknowledged that you did not read the paper, because you said they had no explanation, and the paper provides an explanation. So you, again, either wildly misunderstood the paper or just lied about the paper.
Mistake number 2, and it's throughout this whole video. It's called the ad hominem fallacy, which occurs when somebody attacks the character or personal traits of an opponent rather than addressing the substance of their argument.
This is a false accusation. An ad hominem fallacy occurs when someone attacks someone's character rather than the argument, using the attack on the character in place of addressing the substance of their argument, as you just read out loud. However, in my video, I fully and comprehensively and directly addressed the substance of your argument. I also engaged in some rhetorical flourishes that, by the way, are perfectly accurate, and perhaps we need to add flagrantly dishonest to those rhetorical flourishes. But just because I pointed out that you are awful at this does not make my argument a fallacy. Again, I directly and fully address the substance of your argument.
In Dan's third mistake, he provides no data to support his refutation. Instead, he relies solely on an appeal to authority fallacy.
So there's not a single syllable of my video wherein I ever appeal to authority in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. I shared the paper wherein Dr. Mizumoto gave a hypothesis for how the fish became rapidly buried to disprove the central claim of your video, which was precisely that science had no way to explain how the fish became rapidly buried. So you misrepresented the science. I shared what the science actually said. That's not to say that because Dr. Mizumoto has a degree or publishes in the field, his theory is right. If you can come up with a better explanation, by all means, do it. You don't even have to have a degree or to publish. You can share something on YouTube, and if it is a better explanation, if it is more rational, if it is more supported by the data, guess what? That becomes the science. Anybody can contribute to it if they just provide an explanation that better fits the data.
Yes, their best hypothesis is that the fish were swimming in water and a sand dune collapsed on them, which I knew from the last fossil video I had done.
Suddenly, a sand dune collapsed on top of them. Their fossils show them frozen in their fighting poses.
So yeah, I know. Science's excuse for these rapid fossilization events is collapsing sand dunes. You know, just all of the sand dunes collapsing everywhere. Watch out, here comes another sand dune collapsing on us, Dan. On a school bus, a school of fish, on a school. Sand dune collapse alert. All over the world. It happens all over the world. Yeah, I know.
So now you're sharing previous videos that you've made where you demonstrate knowledge of this hypothesis of rapid burial. And you still made this video where you said science had no way to explain it, therefore we got to default to the flood. You know this theory, and you read the paper where they explained this theory, and you still made a video where you said science has no theory for explaining this. Then you went into comments and said that I never shared their theory of how this happened. And then you went out of your way to try to mock the theory of sand dune collapse, because in order to make the global flood seem like the better theory rather than the only theory, which is what you presented in the previous video, you have to make the sand dune collapse theory sound idiotic. And so you characterize it as something that just isn't very common, and this is not a very likely or a rational theory. The problem is it is very common, and it is a perfectly rational and likely theory. Sand dune collapses happen frequently. Water erosion causes them, human activity, animal activity, wind. All kinds of things can cause sand dune collapses that kill animals and even humans. In May of this year, a 17-year-old boy in North Carolina was killed when a sand dune collapsed above where he was digging a hole on a beach. In August of last year, a 35-year-old man in Florida was just sitting there filming a sunset, and a sand dune collapsed on him and killed him. These things happen with regularity. And if there were not people around to see them happen or to stumble upon limbs sticking out from underneath giant piles of sand, guess where their bodies would be in millions of years from now? Rapidly buried, turning into fossils.
They have an idea that a sand dune collapsed on the fish, Dan, but they have no evidence.
Right. This is the nature of probably most science. You see something and you come up with a hypothesis for how it happened, and then if you are able, you go test that hypothesis. This is why we know that a worldwide flood is not a rational or a likely explanation for these types of things, because we've been testing it for generations, and the more data we gather, the less and less plausible and even possible it is. Now, sand dune collapse is a perfectly rational and a perfectly likely explanation for how this little shoal of fish became rapidly buried. No, we don't have direct evidence of it. That's what makes this a hypothesis, so it's not proven, but you frequently don't get to prove things in science. But the notion that this theory cannot be proven, therefore we have to default to the theory that is laughably implausible, is not a scientific theory. That is just pure dogma.
There's no data that a sand dune fell on the fish, which is really the whole point of my video.
No, the point of that video was what you stated in that video. One, that science has zero answers for this rapidly buried shoal of fish, and that rapidly buried shoal of fish is a big problem for science, because according to science, fossils only happen when fish die and fall to the bottom and somehow get buried, and then bingo bongo turn into fossils. So in this video you actually have to engage the sand dune collapse theory, even though in the previous video and in several comments on my response, you repeatedly, emphatically, and explicitly insisted that no such theory existed. Now you have to represent that theory as stupid so that you can make the global flood theory sound like the better alternative, because it's no longer science has no explanation, we have an explanation, it has to be our explanation is better, and it is very clearly not. And your rhetoric is laughably uninformed.